My grandfather built the house on Millbrook Road in 1962. He built it himself, over 2 summers, with his own hands and the help of 2 brothers who are also gone now. It sits on 11 acres outside of Lewisburg, West Virginia, end of a gravel driveway that runs about a 1/4 mile through the woods before the tree line opens up and the house just appears. White clapboard, green shutters, a covered porch with 2 rocking chairs that have been out there so long the wood has gone silver. I spent every summer of my childhood in that house. I know every sound it makes. The creak of the 3rd step from the top of the staircase. The kitchen faucet that drips for 30 seconds after you turn it off. The furnace in the basement that kicks on like someone dropping a toolbox. My grandfather, Raymond Hale, died in March of 2021. He was 84. My grandmother Louise had gone 2 years before him. Cardiac for both of them. Raymond had a bad heart for years. Nobody questioned it. The house sat empty for almost 3 years after he passed. Estate stuff. Cousins who wanted to sell, cousins who didn't. A family lawyer in Ronsford who moved like he had nowhere to be. By the time it came to me, it was October of 2023. I drove up from Asheville on a Friday. I told myself it was practical. Assess the property. Figure out what needs work. Decide whether to sell or keep it. But honestly, I missed the house. I missed my grandfather. I missed who I was there when I was 8 years old and the summers were long, and Raymond would take me fishing at the pond at the back of the property, and nothing was complicated yet. I want to say that up front, because what happened in that house happened to someone who was not afraid to be there. I wasn't going in nervous. I wasn't looking for anything strange. I was just going home. In the only way that word meant anything to me, after my parents' divorce split my childhood between 2 cities. That house was the one place that had always been exactly where I left it. I should have paid more attention to why Carl Briggs, Raymond's neighbor, the man who found him, went quiet for a moment on the phone when I called to say I'd be staying. He just said, "Well, you know where everything is." The house was in better shape than I expected. The roof was sound. Plumbing worked. Furnace came on when I hit the thermostat. I walked every room that first evening with a flashlight and a notepad, and the house felt exactly like it always had. Quiet. Specific. My grandmother's cleaning products still faintly in the air upstairs, even after 3 years. I set up in the guest room on the 2nd floor, ate a gas station sandwich, went to bed at 10 o'clock. Slept better than I had in months. The first sound came on the 2nd night. I want to be careful about how I describe this because I've tried before and it always comes out wrong. It wasn't a bang. It wasn't scraping. It was coming from the basement, directly below the guest room, the northwest corner. And it was rhythmic in a way that building sounds just aren't. Building sounds are irregular. They respond to temperature, pressure. They don't have a cadence. This had a cadence. Not footsteps. The spacing was wrong for footsteps. Too slow. Too deliberate. Like something marking time rather than moving anywhere. 3 beats. Then silence. 3 beats. Then silence. Maybe 2 minutes of it. Then it stopped. I lay there in the dark and I did what anybody does. I found an explanation. Old houses settle when the temperature drops at night. Furnace pipes contract. Raccoons get into walls sometimes, into basements. Their movements can seem rhythmic when they're nesting. I used those explanations. I went back to sleep. 3 nights later it came again. Same corner, same cadence, but longer this time, maybe 10 minutes. And this time there was a smell, very faint, coming up through the seam where the baseboard meets the hardwood floor. The kind of sweet, organic smell that I can only describe as biological, in an enclosed space. Not sewage, not mold, and I know mold well from 15 years of construction work. This was warmer than mold. It had a temperature to it. I got up and crouched at the baseboard and put my face close to the floor and smelled it. And my body responded before my mind did. I stood up very fast, went back to bed, did not sleep again that night. I told myself, possum. They get into basements through gaps in old foundations. Sometimes they die in the walls, and the smell is sweet and wrong in exactly that way. Possum. Raccoon. Something ordinary. The next morning, I went to the basement door and opened it. It's a full basement. Poured concrete, unfinished. Raymond used it for storage, for the furnace and water heater, and he had a workbench along the east wall with his tools on a pegboard. Every tool in its specific place. That kind of orderliness was that was Raymond. I stood at the top of the stairs and pulled the overhead light on and looked down. It looked exactly like it always had. The furnace, the water heater, the boxes along the west wall, Christmas decorations, old tax records, 60 years of a marriage stored in cardboard. The concrete floor, gray and familiar. Nothing wrong, nothing out of place. Except the smell was there, faint but present, coming from the northwest corner. I went to that corner, and there was nothing there. Bare floor, the foundation wall, a gap between the last stack of boxes in the wall, maybe 2 feet wide. I crouched down and shined my phone flashlight into that gap. Marks on the concrete floor, 4 of them, parallel, roughly equal spacing, each one about an inch wide, maybe 3 inches long. Not scratches, deeper than scratches, more like impressions, like something with narrow, hard points had pressed down into the concrete with a lot of weight behind it. They were clean. The concrete inside the marks was clean, the edges sharp. No dust, no grime. They were recent. I stood up, left the basement, closed the door, and I did not go back for 6 days. I stayed in the house. I want to say that because I think it matters. I kept working, repaired part of the porch railing, replaced 2 outlets in the kitchen, cleared the gutters. I told myself the marks were from furniture Raymond had moved at some point, and the impressions had stayed. I slept with the bedroom door closed and the hall light on, and I did not go into the basement. On the 6th night, I woke up at 2:40 in the morning. I lay there in the dark, listening, and after about 4 minutes, the sound started again. This time, I got up. I took the heaviest flashlight I own, a long mag light I use on job sites, and I went downstairs, opened the basement door, turned on the overhead bulb, and went down. The smell was stronger, noticeably stronger than the morning visit, warmer. There was a density to the air in that basement that hadn't been there in the daytime. I went to the northwest corner, crouched down, aimed the mag light into the gap between the boxes and the wall. It was there. I'm going to be as accurate as I can about what I saw, because accuracy is the only thing I have right now, and I know how this sounds. It was pressed flat against the foundation wall at the very back of the gap. Pale, the color of something that hasn't seen light in a long time. The gray-white you see on cave organisms or the underside of old bark. Low to the ground, I couldn't see it clearly because it was pressed flat and still, and the gap was narrow. But what I could tell was this. It was large. Not large like a bear or a deer. Large in the way of something that had grown inside a space that was too small for it. The specific, compressed mass of a form that has accommodated itself to an enclosure. And it was looking at me. I don't know how I knew that. I couldn't see a face. I couldn't see eyes. But there was a quality of attention coming from the back of that gap that I have no other word for. The specific awareness of something that knows exactly where you are. I stood up. I walked to the stairs. I went up, closed the basement door, went to the garage, found Raymond's padlock collection in his pegboard cabinet, labeled, organized, because of course, and I put a deadbolt padlock through the hasp on the basement door, the hasp that Raymond had installed years ago. For reasons I had never thought to ask about, I sat in the kitchen until the sun came up. I want to explain why I didn't leave. I'm not entirely sure I can, but I'll try. Part of it was stubbornness. Part of it was the kind of paralysis that happens when you've seen something you can't categorize, and your mind keeps going back to find the category it belongs in. In the daytime, with October light in the kitchen windows and coffee in my hand, it was possible to hold on to the animal explanation. It was possible to get through the day. I drove to Lewisburg and bought a motion-activated trail camera at the hardware store. I opened the basement door just enough to set it on the third step pointing down, and I relocked the door. I didn't look at the footage for 3 days. Then one night I couldn't sleep. Not because of a sound. A feeling. The specific feeling of being watched from very close by something that is completely still. I've had this feeling on job sites when I've accidentally cornered an animal. That quality of attention from something large that is not moving. I woke at 3 a.m. with that feeling. Lay completely still for a long time. When I finally turned on the lamp, there was nothing in the room. But on the floor beside the bed, on the hardwood between the bed and the closet door, there were 4 impressions, each about 1 inch wide, 3 inches long, parallel, equal spacing. The same marks that were in the concrete of the basement floor, in the hardwood of my bedroom, made from above, not from below. The marks of something that had been standing beside my bed while I slept, pressing its weight down through its contact points into the wood. I looked at the camera footage the next morning. It had triggered twice in 3 days. The first trigger was at 11:40 p.m. The infrared footage showed the concrete floor, the base of the furnace, the edge of the workbench, and in the northwest corner of the frame, partly cut off by the camera angle, was a shape. Low, wide. The infrared renders everything in flat gray-white. Warm things and cold things look the same in infrared unless the warm thing is warmer than its surroundings. And the shape at the edge of the frame was the same gray-white as everything else, which meant it was warm. It had a body temperature. The second trigger was at 2:17 a.m. The footage showed the empty basement, and then, at the top of the frame where the camera was aimed down the stairs, and the top of the frame showed the underside of the locked door, at the very top of the frame, at the 1/4-inch gap at the bottom of the door, something was coming through it. The edge of a limb, moving slowly through the gap at the bottom of the locked door. The gap that was at most a 1/4-inch wide, moving through it, and then withdrawing. I sat with that footage for a long time. Then I drove to the Holiday Inn in Lewisburg, and I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes before I went inside. I went back the next morning, because it was my grandfather's house, and whatever was in it had been in it while Raymond was alive, and I needed to understand that. I went through his papers. Raymond documented everything. Receipts from the 1970s in labeled folders. A daily journal he'd kept for 30 years. Every bill, every record, everything organized and labeled. I found the box in the back of the closet in his study, behind the filing cabinet, taped shut with old brown packing tape that had yellowed and cracked. No label. Raymond labeled everything. The absence of a label was the first thing I noticed. Inside, a journal, older than his usual notebooks, the cover worn soft from being handled many times. Some photographs, a hand-drawn map of the property, the house, the driveway, the tree line, the pond, and at the northwest corner of the house, right where the basement corner was, a symbol drawn in pencil. I didn't recognize it, and 2 pages torn from what looked like a government document. The letterhead was folded over and partially obscured, but the text was in the specific flat language of official documentation. It described something observed in Greenbrier County, West Virginia, in 1987. At a residential address on Millbrook Road, redacted, but I knew the road number. It described the same impressions in concrete that I had found. It described the thermal signature of a biological entity with no identifiable species classification. And it used a phrase that I have not been able to stop thinking about. The entity appears to have established a sustained cohabitant relationship with the property's primary occupant, with no indication of hostile intent observed over the assessment period. Cohabitant. It had been living with my grandfather since at least 1987, for 34 years. The journal was harder. Raymond had known since the early 1980s. He'd gone through exactly what I went through, the sounds, the smell, the marks, the basement. He'd been just as frightened. And then, over time, he'd made some kind of accommodation with it. He never figured out what it was. He looked. He found nothing that fit. Eventually, he stopped trying to explain it and started just documenting it. The entries about it are years apart sometimes, matter of fact. That quality was more disturbing to me than if he'd been afraid. The basement again last night. It doesn't come up often anymore. Louise doesn't know, never told her, didn't see the point. It doesn't do anything. It just comes. And then one entry that stopped me completely. Found the marks in the guest room this morning. Marcus is visiting next week. I'll put him in the other room. He'd put me in the other room. All those years I spent in the guest room, those were the years Raymond had decided it was safe. The years he didn't allow me in the guest room were the years he'd found the marks. He had been managing my proximity to it my entire childhood, without my knowledge. The last entry was January 2021, 2 months before he died. It's been coming up more frequently, every few nights now, instead of once or twice a month. I don't know if that means something has changed or if it's just winter. Louise has been gone 2 years, and I wonder sometimes if it's the house being quieter that brings it up more. I'm not afraid of it anymore, haven't been for a long time. Whatever it is, it's been here longer than I have. It was here before I built the house. It will be here after I'm gone. I just hope Marcus doesn't come across it on his own. He's not the kind of man who should have to carry this alone. I sealed the basement. Properly. Concrete board, construction adhesive, the works. I know it doesn't matter. I know a thing that moves through a 1/4-inch gap is not stopped by concrete board. But I needed to do something with my hands that felt like an action. The house on Millbrook Road is still mine. I haven't sold it. I drive up from Asheville sometimes and do whatever maintenance the property needs. I don't sleep there anymore. Carl Briggs called me last spring, said he'd noticed lights on in the house a few nights the previous week. Wanted to make sure everything was all right. I hadn't been there in 2 months. I told him it was probably just the timer on the kitchen light. He was quiet for a moment, the same way he'd been quiet the first time. Then he said, "Your grandfather was a good man, Marcus. He kept a lot to himself." I said I knew. I said I was starting to understand exactly how much.